It's official. Georgia won't be holding its 2020 presidential primary on Super Tuesday today. After we told you how the new voting machines were keeping Georgia from setting a date, the state announced voters will head to the polls on March 24th. That is 3 weeks after Super Tuesday. 11 Alive's Doug Richards on the story again. And Doug, Super Tuesday had been a Georgia tradition, but it's out of here.
Yeah, for a bunch of election cycles. Until today, Georgia had been really the only state in the nation that had not named a presidential primary date. The announcement of the March 24th date still left some puzzling questions that stayed unanswered today. Just 2 days ago, the Secretary of State's office told us that there would be no primary date announced until after the state chose a vendor to sell the state about $150 million worth of voting machines like these in the Fulton County warehouse. The new machines are to replace the 2002 vintage machines, these machines, in use through the first half of this year. So this left that date in limbo. The 4 early primaries and caucuses were scheduled for February of next year. 11 Super Tuesday states are due to vote March 3rd. Georgia had traditionally been a Super Tuesday state. It was a question mark until today, when Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger announced the March 24th date. What he did not announce was a new voting machine vendor. His office says that remains a work in progress and did not explain why he decided to announce the primary date without first choosing the voting machines. He may have just changed his mind, and it raises at least the possibility that the old machines may get one last hurrah during next year's presidential primary. State officials do not want that. They want the new system in place by the end of winter, if not sooner. However, the law changing the election system does give the state until the November general election in 2020 to get that particular task done, Jeff.
A lot to be figured out. Doug Richards, thanks.